4 terror attacks in 4 days, all of them concentrated in the same region of Jammu, well below the Pir Panjal range. What's the message the terrorists and, more importantly, their handlers are trying to send? And how should India retaliate? Is it time for another Balakot or Uri-style cross-border attack? And if not yet, what is the threshold when India says enough is enough and that we need to go into Pakistan? Joining us now is a fabulous panel of experts cutting across different spheres of national security. Allow me to introduce to you Lieutenant General Syed Ata Hasnain, former General Officer Commanding of 15 Corps. We have with us Sushant Sareen, Senior Fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. With us is SP Vaid, former Director General of the Jammu and Kashmir Police. Dr. Tara Kartha is the Terrorism and Security Expert. She's been Director at the National Security Council Secretariat. With me in the studio, my colleague and India Today Strategic Affairs Expert, Gaurav Sawant, and our reporter from Jammu, Sunil G. Bhatt. I want to go across to General Syed Ata Hasnain first. General Hasnain, if we were to join the dots of these 4 terror attacks, I happened to be at Rashtrapati Bhavan when news came in of this terror attack at Reasi. It caught everyone off guard, and there's a lot of chatter amongst the dignitaries who were gathered there. This wasn't happenstance. It's clearly planned to coincide with Prime Minister Modi's swearing in. What's the message you think terrorists and their handlers are trying to send?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rahul, for inviting me for this very important program. The event that you just spoke of was the cause itself. In the sense, it had an immense importance about it. It was conveying a message to the world. India, successful democracy, third coming of Prime Minister Modi, the NDA government, as compared to what happened on the other side in Pakistan, where it took 2 months to form a government, weak government, the state of the economy in India, lots of things here were being observed by the world. While on openly, most people may not have assessed it, but it's obvious that the security forces, security agencies would have anticipated this. And I recall, take your mind back to 24 years ago when Chittu Singhpura happened. It happened exactly one night before the morning on which Bill Clinton was to speak in the Indian Parliament, a message to say the American president may be here, but we are still in control from Pakistan's deep state. That's exactly what was happening here, because Pakistan is not controlled by a monolith. It is controlled by different layers. One or a combination of those layers decided that they must convey a message, a strategic message to the world, that while India speaks about all its success and its achievements, while Prime Minister Modi and the NDA speak about their achievements, here they haven't got Jammu and Kashmir under control. That was the clear message that they wanted to convey. It was done deliberately. The area was selected. That area in particular, I'm sure we will discuss it, why that area. Obviously, Kashmir is difficult to go today. You can have small operations here and there, but the combined effect of that will still not be impacted.
Okay.
In this area, you will still feel the impact of it, and we will describe it as we go along in this program.
Sushant Sareen, your reading, if you join these dots, what's the message you think our viewers should know the terrorists and their handlers in Pakistan are trying to send?
So, Rahul, quite clearly, the fact of the matter remains that while we know that Pakistan is down and out and, we know all the problems they are suffering, but they're not ready to throw in the towel. And there are enough statements coming out of the GHQ, out of the Foreign Office in Pakistan, which should have told us that, look, there is no appetite for any kind of a compromise deal, what have you, on this issue. They're lying low because at the time of the elections, they did not want to, bowl another sixer for Mr. Modi, like they did in 2019. So they were trying to avoid it, but they were itching to do something. Number one. So quite clearly that itch is now taken the better of them and they're going to go ahead and do it. Secondly, look, let's face it, the center of gravity of terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir has moved to this region over the last at least 3 years, if not longer. Partly because of what General Hasnain is saying. The space for them to operate in Kashmir Valley has got rather constricted. So a lot of them have moved into the Jammu region. And we should have woken up to this many months back, many years back, actually. Also because the kind of political noises that you were hearing from this region were not exactly something that we should have been sanguine about. Partly because in that entire Jammu versus Kashmir, tussle, this was a region which was completely being ignored, completely neglected. And clearly there was something bubbling out there which many people seem to have missed out on. Number three, and very importantly, these are not just one or two groups now. The spate of incidents that have taken place over the last 4 days, I don't think anybody can tell us that it's the same bunch of people who are going from one place to another. They are not Batman, Superman. So obviously these guys are spread out in small groups, but clearly the kind of operations they have carried out over the last 2-3 years are very different from the kind of silly target killings which these PAFF kind of characters have carried out. These are guys who seem to be highly trained. They've carried out ambushes of military convoys, caused any number of casualties. So I think we should have woken up to this, and then because we have pulled out, because of our own hubris, because that Jammu everything is safe and sound, we seem to have left certain security gaps which we will now need to fill up.
Let Gaurav explain those, because we've moved a division worth of strength from the Jammu region to the line of actual control, because that's where we thought the real threat was, with the People's Liberation Army on the other side, and therefore the terrorists seem to be exploiting these gaps in our security grid south of the Pir Panjal.
Rahul, you're absolutely right. So what's happening in this region is there are critical gaps in intelligence, there are critical gaps in operations, and there are physical gaps which to an extent have been filled, but perhaps not as strongly as should have. You're absolutely right. When uniform force was removed from an area which was declared terror-free, south of Pir Panjal was declared terror-free, and with a lot of pomp and show that we've defeated terror. While that may have been true tactically, strategically, this is the preferred route for infiltration for a very long time. Pakistan has been spreading terror in our country from 1947, when Jinnah sent in raiders, in October 1947. So you may have won in a couple of years, but when you remove a division strength and put them at the LAC, they cannot be filled, those gaps cannot be filled by central armed police forces, and they cannot operate with the same zeal, enthusiasm, command and control like the army, and especially in the higher reaches. So what terrorists did, and I covered Operation Sarpanash in 2003, what terrorists do is that they have their bases on the higher reaches and they come down, carry out a terror strike,
but
and
from
go back.
what I recall, those were dozens of terrorists. Do you see dozens of terrorists here in the higher reaches, or are they much smaller groups like Sushant seems to be suggesting?
So there are multiple groups. They may have a bigger base. The fact that they're well trained, they've targeted 9 para SF, one of our best trained and operationally most solid commandos. They've killed them in an ambush. They've targeted convoys on the road. They've filmed it, the way Islamic State terrorists do. That just goes on to show. So our human intelligence, that's been found wanting, because these terrorists cannot remain in those dhokes or higher reaches unless they have local support of Gujjars, Bakarwals or whoever else in that region. So our human intelligences are found wanting. Our operations we are found wanting. Perhaps somewhere we are not following the kind of standard operating procedures that you need to. If a single truck is going and 5 terrorists ambush that truck and kill everyone and go away with their weapons, that's a major problem. And they're infiltrating across the international border. So which means the BSF has been found wanting, as ADGP Jammu said. If they're coming in from the Samba threat, and Rahul, if I may, that Samba Hiranagar international border, if I may, the biggest threat now is that in case the Amarnath Yatra is targeted, then this will flare up and terrorism will return to the valley, and that's the biggest threat that India faces.
No, absolutely. Very, very major concerns around what is at play. I want to go across to Dr. Tara Kartha on what do you think is at play, because the Amarnath Yatra is, as Gaurav mentions, around the corner. We have a situation where multiple attacks are taking place, and if it happens the first time, you can say, okay, we were found wanting, but if these single trucks keep getting ambushed, as has now happened multiple times, something clearly, even at our end, before we discuss what to do with Pakistan, even at our end, seems to be lacking.
I wouldn't go 100% with what he said earlier. See, the IB, like you said correctly, the BSF thing in IB is a different force. There is a problem there. There has been a problem there earlier also. It's not the first time that infiltration has occurred from that side. That was not an encounter. That was an infiltration, or rather, that was not a terror attack. It was an infiltration which was foiled, right? The major attack is the reasi one. And that is, like we said, is what is worrying us, because And I should tell you something. There would have been a clear idea that there's going to be a rise in terrorist attacks the moment the assembly elections were announced. I mean, there was no question. So everybody would have been on board to let's keep our ears open. So, see, it's easy to say, intelligence failure. You cannot ever, in any country, have 100% intelligence. It's just not possible. So, having said that, yes, there is always room to get better stuff going. The problem here, in terms of operations, is that we no longer have that, convenient thing of tapping these phones, understanding which tower the, communications are coming from. Earlier, it was so simple. You knew X tower is a JEM tower, it's a JEM group, you listen to the chatter, 5-6 log hai. Now it's all silent because they're using a different technology. So it doesn't go to a tower.
What technology do you think these terrorists use at this moment?
This is called, it's a technology which lets your mobile phone into a wireless, bypasses that control tower entirely, and then goes into the dark web. You cannot catch these guys in terms of what they're doing now. That is the problem. So, however, we can't just say, okay, we can't do it and then just sit quiet. I understand from reports in Kathua that there was human. That's how many of these, they barged into a house, that's a different issue. In where the encounters going on right now, even as we speak, there has been human. There is a problem, but human is still very much there. And the reason, why is it that the PPR is now more active? This side of the PPR, because the intelligence grid in Kashmir was fantastic, which I'm sure Gaurav will agree with me. It was a fantastic intelligence grid. Plus, you see the areas opposite it. Try getting, through Gilgit-Baltistan is entirely hostile to Pakistan. Pure Azad Kashmir is in complete protest. Down below is the areas where they can infiltrate. I am assuming that is a big issue here. And also, like we said, getting an intelligence grid in this kind of topography, which Gaurav is very familiar with, forests, tunnels, it's a massive exercise.
Sunilji, but you've been traveling with the armed forces over there, speaking to many of the officers. What are they telling you from the ground? Why do they think so many terror attacks are taking place one after another? Why can't they seem to stop them?
Well, Rahul, there are many aspects to this issue. The foremost, aspect is that after the abrogation of Article 370 and 35A, there was a massive crackdown on terrorism and terror ecosystem in the Kashmir Valley. Funding of the separatists was choked, and as a result of that, law and order issues were also sorted out. Then Pakistan and terrorists changed their strategy. They thought that the best place to strike now is south of Pir Panjal region, particularly the twin border districts of Rajouri and Poonch, because the terrain there suits them. There are, natural caves there which are used as hideouts by these terrorists. And the most important issue, Rahul, here is that the terror handlers which are based in, Pakistan-occupied Jammu and Kashmir and in Pakistan, they have been able to reactivate the network of overground workers. And it's because of these overground, terror workers that these terrorists are able to sustain for such a long time in the upper reaches. They are being provided logistics support by these overground workers. Otherwise, without food and water and other support, these terrorists can't sustain for a long time. And Rahul, the recoveries that have been made from the terrorists in Kathua, it clearly shows that these are not fidains, these are not suicide squads. They are coming for a long haul. They want to create mayhem in Jammu and Kashmir. They want to attack the security forces. They want to attack non-combatants and then go to their hideouts.
Okay, and they also seem to be skilled terrorists. It's not as if these are
absolutely
poorly trained terrorists. They're coming in, they seem to have training because they can stage an attack and then disappear into the jungles. SP Vaid, you've been Director General Police of Jammu and Kashmir. From your reading, we heard from General Hasnain. In your understanding, what's the message the terrorists are sending soon after this government is sworn in for a third time? 4 attacks back to back. What do you think is at play, Mr. Vaid?
Good evening, Rahul. I think the message is very clear. It's testing the new government. It's a message to the third cabinet, which was sworn in Mr. Modi, that we are here. Don't think that we are not there. We can strike at will wherever we want. and that's why they have chosen Jammu region. Jammu region, I'll come to that point why they are choosing Jammu. The message is also to counter the narrative of return to normalcy after abrogation of Article 370. This is what you are seeing in Rajouri Poonch in last one and a half year is to counter the narrative which BJP and the ruling establishment that we are going for a development push after abrogation of Article 370. That's why they were targeted. If you recall, they targeted the laborers, they targeted the Kashmiri Pandits, outsiders. Don't dare outsiders to come to Kashmir. It's also to counter these. So I think the biggest message which they are conveying that let's see how the new government, which they were expecting that Mr. Modi would be in a weaker wicket, which he is not. They are mistaken. But I think they are testing the new government. That is the you saw how the first attack, which was in reasi, timed to that swearing-in ceremony.
I want to come now to the second part of this conversation. How should India respond? The Prime Minister, Sushant Sareen, is at the G7 summit. Last time we sent the special forces in after the Uri attack. They crossed the line of control. Then we used the Air Force in the Balakot airstrikes. Has the threshold been breached already? We know Prime Minister Modi, his national security team, Ajit Doval, being given another opportunity, be NSA, Home Minister Amit Shah, they all met this afternoon before the Prime Minister left to discuss the situation and what to do next. From your prism, is it time for Balakot 2.0?
So, Rahul, you know, the threshold, if you have over 300 seats in parliament is one, and the threshold if you have 240 seats in parliament
why
is a lot.
Why should the strength in parliament determine the threshold, Sushant?
Why? I tell you why. Because it kind of forces your hand that you can't afford to be seen weak. You can afford to ignore certain things if you have a very solid majority. You cannot, especially after the kind of election campaigning you have done on this particular issue.
So you're saying the threshold has actually come down?
I would imagine so. And I would be...
How do you define the threshold? Is reasi a threshold? You know, 5 soldiers, 2 terrorists killed. What is the threshold? Like if you look at the various attacks, 7 terrorists killed in January. In November, 5 soldiers killed. 5 terrorists trigger an IED blast. What's the threshold? There have been so many attacks. You join them together, it's a very big number.
It is a very big number, and that is why at this point in time, given the fact that you've had attacks back to back, I would imagine if I was a Pakistani, I would be extremely terrified because of Mr. Modi's silence. You know, normally what happens is when attacks take place, you have the Prime Minister condemning it, saying something. He's not uttered a word. Last 4 days, he hasn't uttered a single word on this issue. And if I was having known a little bit about the guy, having seen him operate over the last 10 years, his silence is terrifying. And frankly, I'm not entirely sure that this is going to go unpunished. Now, what is the form of the retaliation that will take place, whether it will be along the line of control, whether it will be in some other sector, whether it will be by air, by sea, by land, I don't know. I think everybody will be guessing.
So your sense is the threshold has already been breached, that India is getting ready for a response. That's what you're saying, Sushant?
I'm absolutely surprised because if you let this pass, then you are opening yourself up to a lot more such attacks. So I think there will be some retaliation. But at the end of the day, I think this is a problem that we'll have to keep, we'll have to keep mowing the grass.
General Hasnain, how would you define the threshold? What do you think needs to be done to punish Pakistan? Is it more sensible for India to begin a Sarp-Vinash 2.0, send forces in the upper reaches, try and find where these terrorists are hiding in the Jammu region, first try and neutralize them? Or should we go and teach their masters a lesson?
See, Rahul, this has to be very comprehensively addressed. I tend to agree with a lot what Sushant has just said. But then thresholds are not defined by single horizontal lines on a graph. These are very, very fuzzy lines, and each of us will have a different perception of it. So I don't think it's an easy job for any of us to say...
Do you think the threshold has already been crossed, or do you think it's not there?
You see, when you look at it in perspective, there is a successful election behind us. There is another election about to come, which has been laid down. 30th of September should be carried out. Before that, the Honorable Supreme Court has already laid it down. So the preparations for that have to begin. Obviously, we need to be extremely circumspect about it, that this kind of a thing is going to be repeated then. Perhaps the Pakistanis are now ruining the fact that they didn't do enough to upset the Lok Sabha elections in Jammu and Kashmir.
So I just want to come back to the question I posed to you. In the latest series of attacks that we've seen, has the Indian threshold for response, according to you, already been breached?
I think it has been crossed.
So you're saying the threshold is already been crossed?
It's not necessary. But what happens and what you respond with is a calibrated thing. You see, what the Prime Minister has said and what the media has reported is very clear, that full spectrum, go ahead with a full spectrum response. Now, full spectrum has many meanings, just like as we speak about threshold. First, we'll need to look at the internal part, and your question on Sarfinash, I shall answer there. We have to secure ourselves very strongly. I agree with Gaurav that there are some gaps here. You need additional troops. Amarnath Yatra is coming up. Every year, additional troops are brought for Amarnath Yatra. We need to secure the Amarnath Yatra from the other side also. Otherwise, you normally secure it only in the valley. You need to secure it from the Pir Panjal, the other side of Pir Panjal, the Warwan Valley, and places like that also. For those are the areas from where it can be struck. So additional troops are definitely required. Whether we need a Sarp Vinash, well, I do think this is a time has come when you need to do robust offensive operations. Jungle bashing is the last thing any senior commander will ever recommend to you. But when the threshold has been crossed, as we are all assessing here, then you may not get any results, but you have to do it. This happened in 1999 when the valley was flush with terrorists, if you remember. 6 mountain dip from Bareilly was brought in to secure the Amarnath Yatra, stayed on through the year, carried out deep operations into Rafiabad and Rajwar and places like that, and upset the entire apple cart of the infrastructure which the terrorists have put up. So something like that needs to be repeated once again. My last point to you, something which most people may not be aware of, but I would just like to throw it in as a point of discussion later stages. This Jammu region is very fuzzy in terms of boundaries. You remember the Northern Command boundary was changed. I'm sure you remember it. I'm sure Gaurav remembers it. The Northern Command boundary was changed way back in 2004, 2005. Right? Thereafter, this area was not too active. 2008 onwards, it's not been very active. Now, you've got an awkward situation where Western Command and Northern Command are both looking at this area. 9 Corps and 16 Corps are both looking at this area. In these kind of situations, you need one formation, one commander, one intelligence grid to look after this.
That's a very important point. You can't have multiple layers of authority. It simply leads to everyone just looking behind, hoping the other guy does the job. Gaurav, you've been speaking to officials in the national security establishment. Your understanding of India's threshold, has it already been breached? In some ways, Prime Minister Modi now a prisoner of his image, given what he did after Uri, what he did in Balakot. He has to do something. Otherwise, as Sushant Sareen says, with 240 seats, Rahul Gandhi and the opposition will be gunning for him. Kya kar rahe ho? Attack ho raha hai, aap kuch nahi kar rahe, haath pe haath dhare baith. So it can become a politically explosive issue as well.
So, Rahul, you're absolutely right. So what Pakistan did, Pakistan also learns from India's responses and calibrates. They've been spreading terror since 1947. So they realized that when they did Pulwama, 40 soldiers died, India did Balakot. So they realized that if they kill 40 soldiers in one go, we will do a Balakot. They still keep the numbers up to 40, but don't kill them together. So it's 5 here, 4 there, 5 here, 4 there. It will add up to 40 end of the month or end of 2 months, but it's still not the threshold level. It's like the frog on slow boil in water. So the frog will continue to boil, but will not boil over. This time, there are multiple options, whether it's a missile strike that takes place, whether it's the artillery.
How strong are Pakistan's air defenses?
Pakistan's air defenses were completely vulnerable and called out in Balakot. If 12 of your fighter jets could go in, bomb them, and all 12 come back safely, it just shows how hollow Pakistan's air defenses were that day. However, Pakistan has been strengthening. Pakistan even knew the moment our AWACS comes down, that's the time they sent in their fighters, which did not cross the LC. So Pakistan also is a trained professional army and air force, study us minute to minute. So India will have to outthink them in terms of response, whether it's an artillery strike, whether it's a missile strike, whether it's a surgical strike, or using Pakistanis to kill Pakistanis. There are 100 options that India has.
Do you think the threshold has been crossed?
Well, if the Amarnath Yatra is targeted, if J&K assembly elections are targeted, then that threshold is crossed. But here, it's been happening over a period.
So you don't think it's been crossed yet?
I don't think it's for the government to immediately do something. This is still within the army's domain, that the army needs to respond at the LC. The army needs to respond, whether it's through cross-border surgical strikes, raids, whatever way possible. But the only option, Rahul, and General Hasnain and Sushant Sareen and Mr. Vaid will bear me out, as will Tara Karta, that if Pakistanis kill one of you, you have to kill three of them. That's the only way they will think twice.
Dr. Tara Karta, your sense of the Indian threshold, whether the threshold will be a strike on the Amarnath Yatra, which starts 29th of June, or do you think in aggregate, given what's already happened in the past few days, India's threshold has already been breached and it's time to pay back?
No, I think what Gaurav said is very right. They are going in for these small terror attacks and small groups. Remember, these are 2 and 3 being, it's not the larger groups which are relatively more easily found out. So that is a different pattern.
No, but can I disagree with you just to the extent that if you attack a bus, you don't know how many will die. 10 could die or 30 or 40 could die. So, when you've ordered an attack, you're not trying to deliberately keep it low. It could just be happenstance that only 10 people died. It could have very well be 40 or 50 people if the bus was chock-a-block.
That's a very good point. In fact, what I would love to know is whether this was a target of opportunity or whether it was a deliberate target. I don't know. At the moment, as an intelligence person, I would ask that question. Right? Because whatever you say, the Lok Sabha, the elections went up absolutely peacefully. There was nothing. Right? Second point, the number of people, this might sound heartless, but the number of people who have attacks, killed, is about 1% of what we've seen in the past. It's so much lower. However, also in these 4 attacks, I think 2 were encounters. Not all 4 were not terror attacks. Reasi was the main. But it is targeted at a communal angle, which is very worrisome. That is my biggest worry. And also the fact that, it was a direct challenge to the Modi government. And I think this one's point that the Congress and everybody is going to take this on. They're going to pounce on this. They already have. I mean, how ridiculous is that someone says, you should talk to Pakistan. I mean, what is wrong with you? Why would I talk to Pakistan? So, but I agree with Gaurav. If the Amarnath Yatra is attacked, and this will also put off the local people, because their money comes from the Amarnath Yatra. So they will lose whatever little local support they have. If that is targeted, then we have no choice.
SP, as former DGP, your sense of how vulnerable the Amarnath Yatra, which starts the 29th of June, becomes over and above how vulnerable it usually is. In any case, it has huge security deployment. Would you be stepping up security, and to what extent can you step up security? Because in any case, security is as much as possible for a Yatra as sensitive as Amarnath.
Gaurav, Amarnath Yatra has been very, very sensitive, vulnerable. Ever since the 90s, I have watched it getting even attacked a number of times. Even when I was DGP in 2017, one attack on the Amarnath Yatra happened. And earlier also in the 90s and 2000. Amarnath Yatra has always been on the radar of the terrorists. And the vulnerability, even this time, is no less. But we have a very detailed SOP, and I'm sure if that is strictly followed on ground, it becomes very, very difficult for the terrorists to do any act. And I think
no, but they don't need to attack the Yatra. During the Yatra, they can attack a more vulnerable position or a bus or an isolated vehicle, and that then still explodes because it happens during this sensitive period. In the last part of this broadcast, and I want to start with SP Vaid on this, I want to come to the question which came from Gaurav's show, where he interviewed former Chief of Army Staff General VP Malik, who suggested because of these attacks, postpone elections by a year. Now, we've seen the Supreme Court already lay an end of September deadline. In any case, the government doesn't stop talking about Naya Kashmir, tourism coming back, how there's a lot of development, how security is under control. All those narratives go out of the window if you need to push elections by a year because you don't think you can carry out peaceful and fair elections. So, Mr. Waid, if you were DGP and the suggestion was made and you know what the Supreme Court's already said, would you advise postponing elections, or do you think just go ahead, there may be the odd attack, deal with it, but do not postpone elections?
Gaurav, I would not advise for a postponement of elections because that would amount to giving in to the Pakistan's. But that is what Pakistan wants, and that amounts to giving in to
Correct.
Pakistan. That is why they are stepping up these attacks. We had conducted elections in 96, Assembly election 97, when terrorism was at peak. So I don't think it is difficult to hold election. In fact, they are rattled by the kind of response in the parliament election. It was almost normal like any other part of the country, more than 50% polling. Look at the way people lined up in the polling booths with women and old people lining up early morning. So that is what they don't want, because they deny their own people this right. And that in today's world, in internet world, is seen by people across how Indian people are enjoying these rights.
No,
So
in
I
fact,
think
that
we
could
should-
be one of the reasons why they are startled and alarmed, given the high spike in voting percentages during the Jammu and Kashmir elections. Sushant Sareen, does it make sense to delay elections, as General VP Malik is saying, or do you think that would be a big mistake?
No, what are you going to achieve by delaying elections? Are you going to be able to carve out a new political alternative? You failed in the last 5 years. In fact, if there's been one failure of Mr. Modi's government and the steps they've taken in Kashmir, is that there is no viable political alternative which has managed to emerge.
Well, they tried,
So-
it didn't work, people didn't buy it.
So it didn't work. The bottom line is that if you delay elections by 3 months,
No, but
6
can I
months,
counter argue to say it also shows that you can't create alternatives? Alternatives have to emerge organically. You can't just force them from the top because they get exposed as yo Delhi ke aadmi and then nobody buys them.
So thanks for buttressing my point that if you delay elections by another 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, how does it change the political situation? Number one. Number two, what is the guarantee that, okay, you've delayed it by 1 year and suddenly there won't be a spate of incidents 3 months before the next elections are to take place? So you have to go through with the elections, and as Mr. Vaid says, that you've held elections in much, much, much worse circumstances.
Correct, absolutely.
So the problem in holding elections. The problem is what happens after the elections. If whichever political party comes over, takes over power, what will its attitude be? Will it carry out that old policy of running with the hare and hunting with the hound, or will it be much more upfront and much more cleaner in its dealings and clean up the state of Jammu and Kashmir? And the worst possibility that if separatists also start taking part in the elections and manage to hold the balance of power in the next assembly, then all bets are off.
You know, and remember, Engineer Rashid won the Baramulla seat while
Yes,
being imprisoned, and therefore that is a real challenge. Gaurav, you seem to agree with General Malik, where you wanted elections to be delayed. Why?
So, I want the situation to be better. Postpone elections, perhaps not, but at least hit Pakistan so that Pakistan knows if it tries to disrupt elections, there are costs. Unfortunately,
No,
for a
surely
large
Pakistan
part,
already knows that.
so it's testing you once again. Remember, it tested Prime Minister Narendra Modi in 2014 when he was being sworn in. There was a terror attack on our consulate in Afghanistan. So they were waiting to see what kind of response follows. You've permitted Pakistan into your Pathankot base. You expected them to take action. Pakistan did not. So you know Pakistan's DNA. It is a terror state. So if Pakistan knows if they kill one of yours, you kill 3 of theirs, they will think twice before disrupting you.
No, but shouldn't they already be thinking twice on the back of what? It also raises questions about the level of deterrence, General Hasnain, because if you imagine that Balakot or Uri would have taught Pakistan a lesson and they'd back off, clearly that lesson now seems forgotten. I mean, it bought us some peace for a while, but it seems that slap's now been forgotten.
See, Rahul, even though what happened in 2016 and 2019, I, for one, never called it acts of deterrence. You can't do acts of deterrence with surgical strikes and one-off strike on Balakot or something like that. These have to be sustained over a period of time. We have to show a different kind of an intent. We didn't want to cross that threshold at that particular time. I think what we were intending to do was to actually convey a message. You do it, we will do it back to you equally well, right? And you cannot afford it as much as we can afford it. Right? That was the kind of message which was being
Would
sent
you
out.
delay elections or you'd bash on regardless and conduct elections? General
See, my former chief has said something, but obviously he would have his reasons for it. But I, for one, I have seen 5 elections in Kashmir, one more difficult than the other. I've stood at Avantipur and seen the entire South Kashmir burning during an election. But I would still say elections, that is, to use an Urdu word, that is the daromadar. That is the acme of all success. If you get your elections into place, if you have a civilian government once again back in place, if the aspirations of the Kashmiri people of restoration of the state of Jammu and Kashmir to its status of being a state is all done, you will have won this war completely.
I don't
think we should be stopping it.
I traveled through North Kashmir during this Lok Sabha election. I'm pretty sure, Dr. Kartha, that if assembly elections are held, the level of participation should be higher than what we saw during the Lok Sabha election. So that is directly people electing their own government. There would be, if by then we restore statehood, it would be even higher. Even if statehood is not restored, the level of participation would be even higher than the Lok Sabha elections. Do you think it makes sense to carry out the elections as the Supreme Court is mandated before the end of September? Or would you suggest, like General Malik does, that we delay it?
I absolutely oppose what General Malik says. There's no two ways. Your Lok Sabha elections are a testimony that the people of Jammu and Kashmir believe in your democracy. And they stood up and they voted for the people they wanted. And that is the sheer credibility of this exercise is what gives you confidence even in counter-terrorism operations. The two merge. It's not one separate and the other separate. So I don't think we should even go down that road.
Sunilji, but let me put you on the spot. If you use the Lok Sabha elections as a base file, try and draw meaning, even though it is very difficult because the context is different, try and draw meaning for what this may mean in the assembly context. Who do you think might be in pole position to form the next state government or the next union territory government in Jammu and Kashmir?
Right, Rahul. If we go by the trends and the results of the Lok Sabha elections, BJP was leading in 29 assembly segments. National Conference was leading in 34 assembly segments, and Engineer Rashid was leading in 14 segments, and Congress Party 7 to 8 segments. So it seems that if this same result gets repeated during the assembly election, we may see a hung house, we may see a fractured mandate, and then the two parties, whether it's the BJP or National Conference or say National Conference or Congress, they will have to ally and form the government. But no single party is going to get a clear mandate as per the results of the Lok Sabha elections. There is a possibility that there is this buzz in the political circles here in Jammu and Kashmir that National Conference and BJP may tie up post-poll. However, National Conference has made it, categorically clear that they are not going to tie up with the BJP. But if you remember, Rahul, some time back I had interviewed Farooq Abdullah and he had said that he's open to joining the NDA. Later on, Umar Abdullah had to do the damage control. He addressed a press conference. He said, no, there is no such possibility. So any possibility can emerge after the assembly elections.
But if voters in Kashmir start thinking that NC is a vote for an NDA government in Srinagar, then the NC will have its own problems, and the likes of Engineer Rashid and his ilk might get strengthened. So it's a mess. You can't look at this Lok Sabha election and draw meaning very concretely about what this means for the assembly election, but that's a very, very fascinating election, and I hope that we go ahead, regardless of what my dad's former boss said, I hope that we go ahead and conduct the elections in the way that is currently being planned. So we've had a enriching conversation, lots of sharp insights from our guests. So for those insights, General Hasnain, Mr. Waid, Sushant Sareen, Dr. Tara Kartha, thank you very much. Thanks also to my colleagues Sunil Jibhat and Gaurav Sawant.